Ins and outs of inclusion. With Ben Breaux, non-speaking autistic advocate from Communication First. Hello. My name is Ben Breaux, and I am a 22-year-old non-speaking autistic with epilepsy from Northern Virginia who communicates using a letterboard and a communication regulation partner to transcribe the words I point out or type. About me. My interests include elephants, pudding, and cheese. I also love the show Friends. I don't do sports on teams or anything, but I do like to dance. I like pop music, especially Whitney Houston, and anything upbeat really. I have gone through a few phases of listening to all sorts of music. I like history and math the most in school, and writing obviously, as I am pursuing a career in journalism. I have a white, goofy dog named Bo. He's super fluffy and playful. I love YouTube, but I don't have a favorite YouTuber. I prefer to scroll and watch any random music or censor a video that catches my eye. I love where I live now, but I would love to live near a beach. I like the sounds of waves and the fresh, salty breeze along with the warm sand. I'd love to visit Sicily, Italy. That is where my mom's side of the family is from. Here's a mini geography lesson. As you can see, Italy is shaped like a boot, and the city of Palermo, where my relatives live, on the island of Sicily, is just off its toe. I like making art, and used to make a lot with glitter paint and folded paper to create symmetrical messes of art. While I did make these pieces for myself, I entered some in local art contests, and have won several prizes, including Best of Show among all artists. I also once had an art show at a local high school, and raised around $1,800 for a local charity. This shows how doing things you enjoy can sometimes also help others. Another hobby I have is writing. I love it, and plan to be a journalist. I think that words hold so much strength, and so many tell me that I can't write or have complex thoughts, so I want to write more to show what I can do. Writing allows me to express my inner thoughts and ideas in a way that I can share with so many people. Here are some screenshots of some of my published works. In fact, I got one of my paintings and poems published in a magazine last year. Back in 2017, a story about me and my artwork was featured in a fancy, mainstream art magazine. As I said in my interview, my artwork means the world to me. Doing art addresses my feelings visually. Do any of you feel the same way too? I am proud of my artwork accolades, but more proud that it shows how people with disabilities can achieve and shine in so many different ways. I also recently just tried my hand at making a TikTok. Communication. I can communicate through three main tools. 1. iPad. I have an iPad on me at all times with an app called Proloquo 2 Go that lets me express simple needs. It has buttons that have voices that let me say things like, I need water, and that is as deep as that app goes. I also have an app that I use for presentations and recordings, which I am using now for this presentation, that reads my previously written words. This allows me to use a manly voice, instead of having my female CRPs read my words. 2. Letterboard and communication regulation partner. Then I can communicate in person and in the moment with the letterboard and CRP. My CRPs, or communication regulation partners, hold the letterboard for me, while I point to letters, and they follow along to speak my words. A letterboard is a laminated alphabet, with some punctuation. I can also use a letterboard to do high-level mathematics. My mom even designed a glow-in-the-dark letterboard for me to use wherever it's dark, like at live theater productions, the movies, even fireworks displays. 3. Keyboard and CRP. Lastly, I can use a keyboard in a similar way as the letterboard. I have been working on using this more autonomously as well, like using a stand or holding it myself. Before I learned to use the letterboard, it was complicated for me to communicate. I used a lot of sounds and attempts to point to tell others what I wanted or needed. I wasn't always successful, and I couldn't express my thoughts. I hoped that someone would be able to read my mind sometimes, but of course, no one could. Even once I learned to use my iPad to communicate, I was only able to communicate in the most simple, functional terms provided on the app on my iPad, so my personality and humor were locked inside my head. Along with that were all the bad things too. I couldn't explain when I was in pain or why I was crying. I could only really say that I was hungry, or tired, or wanting to go in the car, or to the bathroom, leading me to so much frustration. Ironically, no words can adequately describe this feeling. There are usually mixed reactions when people communicate with me. Some people are surprised and congratulate me like I am a toddler, others don't believe that I am saying anything, that it is all my CRPs. Many people talk to and look at my CRPs, instead of me, as if I am not there and can't have a conversation. It can be complicated, because not everyone has experience or knowledge on non-speakers, but it is great too, to be able to take away the negative thoughts of those who don't know better, by showing what I can do. What do you do when people treat you differently? It depends on the setting, but I tend to push through and keep expressing myself. There are always going to be people who don't know much about non-speakers, or have misconceptions in their minds, so I've learned I can't let every one of them get to me. Just because no words come out of my mouth, does not mean they are not in my mind. Dealing with bullying. I sometimes get unkind comments when I share articles or do public presentations. I even had a website take down work that I made, because of the terrible comments people were leaving. And usually these commenters are coming from a mean, an ignorant place, of not believing in what non-speaking people can do. But I say it's not worth it addressing them, and I continue to do all I can, to increase awareness and raise acceptance and understanding. I know firsthand how it feels to be disregarded, and thought less of, and I will fight to make sure nobody else has to feel that way. How did you overcome your challenges? I try to find the positives in everything, and hope things will work out when it gets tough. Inclusivity. The fact or policy of not excluding members, or participants, on the grounds of gender, race, class, sexuality, disability, or other parts of their identity. My 4 A's of inclusion. 1. Assuming competence. 2. Accepting. 3. Accessibility. 4. Accommodations. Assuming competence. Everybody has the ability to learn when provided proper accommodations and access. When you assume competence, you acknowledge that every person is capable of learning, reasoning, and complex thoughts, without them having to prove it to you. Imagine if your gym teacher said you couldn't participate in playing kickball with the rest of your class because they said your legs were too short. The teacher didn't give you a chance to show you were capable of playing. They just assumed that because your legs are shorter than others, that you would be unable to play. That was an example of not assuming competence. Competence is not commonly assumed in the disability community. I have experienced this with public schools. It is often thought that I am unable to learn at a high level, just because of the difference in the way I communicate, and my inability to sit still and watch in school. Accepting. This means looking at things we have in common, and realizing the strength in diversity, for where we are different. Learn to accept people for who they are, not who you want them to be. Being different is okay, and we must strive to accept our differences, instead of trying to change them. Look around your classroom. You all look differently, dress differently, and like different things. But you all still come together as a class to grow and learn. This is an example of accepting each other. Accessibility. This is when the needs of all people are specifically considered. And products, services, facilities, and communication are created and modified so that they can be used by people of all abilities. Imagine you have to use laptops for a whole class period to do individual work. But some of your laptops are half charged, some are fully charged, some are dead, and no one has chargers. This would make the class work inaccessible, because not everyone has the resources to be able to do it. Just as if a building only has stairs, and no ramps or elevators. This building would be inaccessible to people with mobility issues, such as someone who uses a wheelchair to get around. It is not the inability to walk that keeps a person from entering a building by themselves, but the stairs that are inaccessible that keeps a wheelchair user from entering that building. Accommodations. The process of adapting or adjusting to someone or something according to their needs. If you look at the first picture of the three people watching the soccer game, you'll notice an inaccessible design that excludes people. The fence makes it hard for the shorter people to see without some sort of help. In the second picture, accommodations give access to whoever is there at the moment. They often require extra work. As you can see, boxes were provided to accommodate for the varying heights of the viewers depending on their individual needs. In the third picture, accessible design means that current and future viewers will have access without extra work. This design makes it possible for everyone to see, like a universal accommodation. Accommodations can look different for every person. Common accommodations I need include extra space to move around, having a CRP, and using a letterboard, needing extra time to finish spelling, and carrying my iPad with me for regulation and communication purposes. You may have noticed some overlap. The four A's all go hand in hand. Accepting and assuming competence can often come together in just generally being a good person. You cannot be truly accessible if you do not provide accommodations to all. Some great ways businesses and companies can be accommodating and accepting for autistics who have similar needs as mine include offering sensory-friendly options or events at places like theaters or museums, etc. having break or quiet rooms at events, and fidgets, having them available and deeming them acceptable to use. Inclusive language. This avoids expressions that are considered to express or imply ideas that are sexist, racist, or otherwise biased, prejudiced, or insulting to any particular group of people. Simply put, words that include everybody and do not single out a group or groups of people in a negative or harmful way. Common inclusive language mistakes corrected. I do not suffer from autism. I am autistic. It is part of who I am. My autism does not need to be fixed. I prefer the terms special needs or differently abled instead of disabled or handicapped. High or low functioning labels are not helpful and are actually very harmful. I prefer the use of non-speaking when describing me instead of non-verbal. Let me explain. I am autistic, not a person with autism. My autism affects every part of my life. It is not my whole identity, but it does affect how I interact with people in the world around me. So, it is important to present it first in introductions. Also, it is an adjective that describes me and my behaviors. Autism is not a disease, and person-first language is what you use for something someone is trying to get rid of, or beat, like COVID or an infection. We would say person with COVID, instead of COVID person. No one cures their autism, and it's not something we can beat, or eliminate. Non-speaking versus nonverbal. Nonverbal is defined by Merriam-Webster as not involving, or using words, and lacking, or appearing to lack, the ability to engage in speech. Verb comes from the Latin word verbum, which means words. Nonverbal perpetuates the assumption that those without speech do not know language at all. This leads to the false belief that we are not intelligent or do not have thoughts. Speech is how we physically produce sounds and words. Non-speaking is defined as not involving spoken lines, and not speaking, or being able to speak. Non-speaking is exactly what it sounds like. Non-speakers have a desire to execute the movements and gestures to form words, but our bodies are unable to do so. In summary, inclusion comes from assuming competence. Everybody has the ability to learn when provided proper accommodations and access. Accepting. Looking at things we have in common and realizing the strength in diversity for where we are different. Accessibility. Specific consideration of the needs and abilities of all people when creating and modifying products, services, facilities, and communication. And accommodations. Adapting or adjusting to someone or something according to their needs. Inclusive language and non-inclusive language. Use autistic instead of person with autism or high or low functioning autistic. Use non-speaking instead of non-verbal. Use special needs or differently abled instead of disabled or handicapped. Say blank is autistic, blank is on the spectrum, or autistic person, instead of referring to autistics as suffering from autism, or autistics needing to be fixed. If you have any questions, I can give a few short answers on my letterboard now.